Good afternoon and welcome to the course on abnormal psychology. So we are into the classification of the abnormal behavior into the 5 axes. We are into the second axis, axis 2. We have seen already it is divided into 3 clusters, cluster A, cluster B and cluster C. We have already seen the first 2 clusters. Now today we are going to begin with the third cluster, cluster C, under axis 2, cluster C. Axis 2 personality disorders and cluster C. This cluster is called anxious and nervous cluster. Anxious and nervous. That is the main characteristics of this cluster. Anxious and nervous. Anxious and nervous. Fretful and fearful. Fretful means they are always under fear. Fretful and fearful. Fretful and fearful. Averting and avoiding. Averting, avoiding. So these are some of the adjectives which will help us to understand this cluster. The general characteristics of the personalities which come under cluster C. They are basically anxious and nervous, fretful and fearful, averting and avoiding. Because of their anxiety and nervousness, they will be always fearful and they will be avoiding things, avoiding people. So basically they are avoiding. There is a lot of anxiety and a lot of nervousness. That is the main characteristics of people, those who come under cluster C. And basically there are 3 disorders. Avoidant personality disorder, dependent personality disorder and obsessive compulsive personality disorder. So these 3 disorders, 3 personality disorder come under cluster C. Avoidant, dependent and obsessive compulsive. All these 3 are anxious people, or nervous people. Obsessive. They are obsessive, they are also compulsive. Obsessive compulsive personality disorder. So we call it APD, avoidant personality disorder, DPD, dependent personality disorder, and then famous OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. So formerly we have seen antisocial personality disorder, that we can make it as ASPD, antisocial personality disorder, just to distinguish it from avoidant personality disorder. So that is ASPD and this is APD. So these are the 3 personality disorders which come under cluster C, which is very anxious and nervous, fretful and fearful, averting and avoiding. It is because of their anxiety, because of nervousness, they have tremendous fear deep down and they tend to avoid people. Either they cling on to people or they avoid people because of their anxiety, which they are not able to manage, which they are not able to cope up with. Now let us look at each of these personality disorders, their particular characteristics, which will give us more clarity about cluster C. So it is basically anxious cluster, just as cluster A is odd and eccentric cluster. Cluster B is emotional, erratic and dramatic cluster. Cluster C is anxious and nervous cluster. So these 3 keywords, if you remember, then you will be able to understand the personality disorders which come under these clusters. So let us analyze avoidant personality disorder. Avoidant personality disorder, OCD. Avoidant personality disorder. Avoidant Personality disorder. APD. APD. And as usual, we shall use an acronym to understand this personality. That is ridicule. That is acronym used for describing avoidant personality disorder. Ridicule. Ridicule. What is this ridicule? This R stands for reserved. They are very reserved people. The very word explains. Now, avoidant people means the person who avoids relationships, the person who avoids communication, the person who avoids meeting new people or strangers or new circumstances. You'll always tend to avoid people, avoid situations, avoid circumstances. There is basically a social withdrawal. Some similarity with the personality we have seen in cluster A, schizoid and schizotypal. They also have social withdrawal. But these people, it is mainly due to their over anxiety. So that is the main characteristics. So R stands for reserved. They are very much reserved people. Reserved in relationships. Because of this nature of being reserved, they avoid relationships. They are reserved within relationships. They have some relationships, but they are very much reserved. They don't communicate much. They don't express themselves much. They have a lot of inhibitions. So they are always reserved people. They are rather quiet. So another word also explains the same. I stands for inhibition. Same. They are reserved and they are inhibitions. They are not free to express themselves because they are so much anxious. Inhibition. I stands for inhibition. Inhibition in interpersonal dealings. Their inhibition are inhibited in interpersonal dealings. They are not comfortable in interpersonal dealings. We said one of the important characteristics of normality is interpersonal mastery. I hope you remember that. Interpersonal mastery, intrapersonal mastery. Then we talked about transpersonal mastery, the environmental mastery. These four masteries we talked about. Whereas these people, they have hard time in terms of interpersonal dealings. They are inhibited in interpersonal dealings because they are basically reserved. That comes from their anxiety and nervousness. And D stands for disapproval. Disapproval. They always fear disapproval from others. That's why they don't relate with the others. Disapproval. Disapproval. Expected at works. Disapproval. Expected at work. Because they think they will be rejected by others. They will not be appreciated by others. They will not be accepted by others. That is their fear. So, disapproval is expected at work. Disapproval expected at work, which pushes them backward. Because of this fear, they withdraw themselves. And I stands for inadequacy. I stands for inadequate view of the self. Inadequate. Inadequate view of the self. They are very view of the self. They have kind of inferiority complex. They don't trust in themselves. I mean, they are not confident about themselves. Inadequate view of the self. They feel they are not competent enough, or they feel they are good for nothing. They are not good enough. So that makes them to feel inadequate or insecure. Another word, I stands for inadequacy or insecurity. They feel very much insecure. That also prevents them from relating with the others because they feel they may not be accepted by the others, they may not be appreciated by the others, or they may be rejected by the others. That creates a lot of fear in these personalities, which in a way pushes them backward. They tend to withdraw themselves from interpersonal gatherings or interpersonal dealings and relationships. And C stands for criticism. C stands for criticism. See, all these characteristics are interrelated, connected. Criticism. They expect criticism from others, especially in social situations. Criticism is expected in social situations. They feel they will be criticized by others. That's the fear they have. They have extreme anxiety, extreme nervousness and fear. That's why they avoid relationships. So criticism is expected in social situations. That is their feeling, that is their conviction, that they will be criticized by others. So when there is a threat of being criticized, why to relate with the other? That is their ideology. So criticism is expected in social relationships, in interpersonal dealings. And U stands for unwillingness. Unwillingness to relate. Unwillingness. Unwillingness to relate, to mingle with the others, to establish relationships. They have this strong reluctance. Another word, unwillingness or reluctance to relate. Reluctance to relate. Unwillingness or reluctance to relate. They cannot relate or they don't want to relate because of the fear. Again, looking at the characteristics of normal behavior is thinking, feeling, willing, acting. You remember, those basic characteristics. Whereas these people, they cannot have this willingness. They don't have any determination. So they will be very reluctant, very stubborn to relate with the others. So that's what makes them as people who avoid things, basically they avoid relationships, avoid new situations. And L stands for longing. Longing. L for longing. Longing for attachments. Longing for attachments. They have a longing, basic longing for some attachments, but they don't get attached because of the fear, because of anxiety. That's why they avoid relationships. So basically there is a longing in these people. They also want to relate, but they have fear of being rejected, being ridiculed, or being not accepted by others. That's why they avoid relationships. So there is a longing in these people for attachments. And finally, E stands for embarrassment. Embarrassment. So they feel they have fear of being embarrassed. Embarrassment. They feel they may be humiliated. They may be put into a situation of ridicule. So embarrassment. So they have fear of being humiliated. That is embarrassment. Fear of being humiliated. Fear of being made fun of by others. That's why we have given this word, ridicule. This very word, acronym, describes their personality. They have fear of being ridiculed, fear of being humiliated, fear of being put in a situation of embarrassment. So basically they avoid relationships, even though they have a longing for attachments. But they cannot have attachments. They cannot have relationships because of their fear of being rejected, fear of being humiliated, fear of not being understood, and that also creates kind of fear of being criticized. And they have inadequate view of the self, inaccurate view of the self, and they feel insecure, which creates a lot of fear and anxiety in them. So they tend to withdraw themselves from the crowd, from the social situations, from the interpersonal dealings. So that is this personality called avoidant personality disorder, APD. Avoidant personality disorder, and this acronym ridicule explains or helps us to understand the various characteristics of this avoidant personality disorder. So if you remember this very word, that is, you will be able to understand. Avoidant, they tend to avoid because of anxiety, because of fear. And second personality which comes under cluster C is DPD, dependent personality disorder. Hope it is clear for you. Ridicule, avoidant. So second personality in cluster C is dependent personality disorder. Dependent personality disorder. It's also very clear from the very word. They are just the opposite of avoidant. If you understand the avoidant personality, you know what is dependent personality. They will just go to the other extreme. They will be always clinging on to people, always craving for relationships. If they lose one relationship, immediately they will go for the other relationship because they cannot stand on their own. Another extreme. Both are extremes. The avoidant personality, they go to the extreme of avoiding people, whereas dependent personality, they go to the other extreme of clinging on to people. They will be craving for relationships. And they have no stand of their own, no sense of self. They become the shadow of the other people. That is this dependent personality disorder. Dependent. 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 Dependent personality disorder. Dependent. Dependent personality disorder. And the acronym that is given for this dependent personality disorder is DON-HUT. DON-HUT. It's a very strange acronym, but DARN. DON means stitching, sewing. DON-HUT. Hurt needs to be stitched. Sewing, no? When something is broken, we go for stitching. Yeah. So that is the acronym given for describing this dependent personality disorder. DON-HUT. Hurt needs to be healed. These people always need somebody else to care for them, to understand them, to appreciate them. And they live a shadow life. DPD. DPD. DON. DARN. DON-HUT. Hurt. DON means stitching or sieving. DON. Stitching or sieving. Stitching or sieving. The hurt needs to be healed. They have a lot of woundedness and they need relationships to nurture them, to nourish them, to protect. So D stands for disagreement. D stands for disagreement. Very difficult for them to disagree with somebody. Disagreement. Disagreement. Disagreement is difficult to express. Disagreement is difficult to express. D for disagreement. Disagreement is difficult to express. These people cannot disagree with the others. Because if they disagree with somebody, they have the fear of losing this relationship. If I disagree with you, then you may be upset with me and you may not relate with me. So I don't disagree with you. So it is difficult for them to express themselves. Mainly, they have disagreement. Very difficult for them to express their disagreements. So D stands for disagreement. It's difficult for them to express their disagreements. So they will always agree with you. All the time they agree with the other persons in order not to risk the losing of relationship. That is their fear. Same, these people also have the extreme fear, anxiety and nervousness. They are also fearful, but they will be more of clinging to others. So D stands for disagreement, difficulty in terms of expressing their disagreements with the others. And A stands for advice. A stands for advice. Advice. Advice needs, they need excessive inputs. They always need advice from others because they have no stand of their own. Excessive advice is needed. They are always in need of advice. For anything and everything, they look for the others. They cannot even make a simple decisions of everyday life. They are very indecisive people. So they need excessive advice from other people. That shows their dependent nature. And R stands for responsibility. R stands for responsibility. We are only giving the key words. But you need to write the whole thing for you to have clarity. Responsibility is always given to others. They will never assume responsibility. Responsibility. Responsibility is always delegated. They don't assume responsibility. Because they don't have the courage, they don't have the esteem for the self, they don't have the regard for the self, because they are always living under the shadow of somebody. So all the responsibilities they delegate to others. Any responsibility you give to them, they will never own up the responsibility. Because they feel they are inadequate, incompetent, and they feel very much insecure. Mainly responsibility, the major responsibilities, they will never take up. Even simple responsibilities also they will not take up. Leave alone the major responsibility. So responsibility will be always delegated to others. They cannot assume any responsibility. And N stands for nurturance. Nurturance. N for nurturance. Nurturance means being helped, being loved, being cared. They want excessive nurturance from others because they are depending people. So they want to be nurtured by others, other peoples. They want to be loved, they want to be accepted, they want to be appreciated, but in an extreme degree. They want it all the time. That's what makes them as people with a little abnormality. And that's what makes this personality as a dependent personality disorder, because they want it in an extreme degree. So they look for excessive nurturance from others. They seek for excessive degree of nurturance from other people. Nurturance means to be loved, to be cared, to be taken care, to be appreciated. Everything that we receive from others, they want it in a very excessive manner, in an extreme way. So that is done. So they disagree. They will not disagree with the others. And they seek advice from others all the time. Responsibilities are always delegated. They will never assume responsibility. And they always look for nurturance from others in an excessive manner. And H stands for helpless. Helplessness. They always feel helpless. Helplessness. Helplessness. Especially when they are alone, they feel helpless. They cannot stand alone. They need somebody to cling on to. So they are helpless people. Helplessness. And U stands for unrealistic. They are very unrealistic. They are not realistic, they are very unrealistic. Because of this, they think they cannot stand alone, which is not true. Every person has got certain autonomy. There are areas in our life where we need to be on our own. All the human beings. That is one of the qualities of the positive mental health, autonomy. Hope you remember the 6 characteristics of psychologist called Zegoda. We have seen in our first classes. Autonomy. Whereas these people, they don't have any autonomy. They always cling on to others. So that is unrealistic. They think they cannot manage themselves on their own. Not even for the simple everyday things of life. That makes them unrealistic people. And R stands for relationships. They always need relationships. Relationships. When one relationship ends, immediately they look for another relationship. If they break away, if something happens and the person leaves them, immediately they will cling on to another relationship because they can never stand alone. That is their belief. They have unrealistic belief that they can never stand alone. So immediately they look for another relationships. They will never stand on their own. So when one relationship breaks, immediately they look for another relationships. And finally, T stands for task. T stands for task, everyday task or any task. Task will never be fulfilled. Task will never be fulfilled. They will never fulfill a task. In fact, they can neither initiate a task nor fulfill a task because they don't assume responsibility. So T stands for task. They will neither initiate nor fulfill. If we initiate only, we can fulfill a task. For them, these people, they have difficulty in initiating a task. First of all, difficulty in assuming responsibility for a task or anything that is given to them. So they can neither initiate a task nor fulfill a task. So that is T. So it is just the opposite of the avoidant personality. They want to be always alone, whereas dependent personality disordered people, they want to be always clinging on to others. And they never disagree with the others for the fear of losing the relationship. They always seek the advice from others. They can't even make a simple decisions. They are very indecisive people. And they never assume responsibility. They always delegate responsibility for other people. And they always look for nurturance, extreme nurturance from the others. They want to be loved, understood, cared, and they look for it in an extreme way. And H stands for helplessness. They feel they are helpless when they are alone. That's why they need clinging relationships. And they are very unrealistic because of this. They think they cannot function alone. They have this basic conception in their mind that they cannot work on their own, which makes them very unrealistic. And they always have relationships. One relationship ends, immediately they will look for another relationship because they think they cannot stand on their own. And finally, task. They neither initiate a task nor complete a task. So these are some of the characteristics of dependent personality disorder. So this brings us to the last personality disorder of this cluster, cluster C. So dawn hurt, stitching or sieving a wound. The third one is obsessive compulsive disorder. It's a well-known personality disorder. People who are perfectionistic. Perfectionistic people, obsessive compulsive disorder. These people also have basically they're anxious people, nervous people. Because of their anxiety and nervousness, they never get satisfied. They cannot enjoy their task, what they are doing. They keep on working, are very hard-working people, but they never get satisfaction, never feel at home in what they are doing. They will be constantly working without any satisfaction, without any contentment. So they don't enjoy what they are doing. So obsessive compulsive disorder, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, obsessive compulsive, obsessive, obsessive compulsive. Obsessive compulsive. Obsessive compulsive personality, usually it is called OCD, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, or some even call it OCPD, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, OCPD. Usually it is called OCD, some also call it as OCPD, obsessive compulsive personality disorder. The acronym that is proposed to understand this personality is low mirth. Low L-O-W, low. Mirth, M-I-R-T-H. Mirth means entertainment. Mirth means entertainment. So, they have no entertainment. That is this personality. They don't enjoy what they are doing, but they will be keep on working. No mirth means no enjoyment or low enjoyment. No merriment. Low mirth means very low enjoyment or no enjoyment. The first one, L stands for leisure. Leisure activity is minimal. Leisure activity. If you give them time for recreation, they don't go for recreation. They will be doing something else. They think it's a waste of time. All will be having recreation and fun or watching television or doing something else. Whereas these people, they go and continue their work because they cannot afford to have recreation. That's what they think. Leisure activity is minimal, very minimal leisure activity. L stands for leisure activity. It is very minimal, no leisure activity. That is their person. Low mirth means no enjoyment. And O stands for organizational, organization. They are only focusing on organizations, organizing themselves, organizing others, organization. Any work is given to them, they will be only focused on that. Organization. Their full focus is on organizations. Organization of the activity or organization of the task that is given to them. Unlike the dependent personality, they never take up task. Whereas these people, they will never give up a task. In fact, they will not complete a task because they don't get satisfaction. So, organization. They will be fully focused on their organization. And W stands for work. They are workaholics. Work. Their work predominates. Predominantly, they will be working. Predominant. Again, because of this anxiety and tension inside. Dependent personality people, they will never take up any work. Whereas these people, they will be all the time working, non-stop working. Workaholics. Their work predominate. Work without leisure. Then M stands for misers. Miserly spending habits. M for miserly spending habits. They are very miserly. They don't spend money. Miserly spending habits. Mainly with the money, they are very miserly. They cannot give things. They will be keeping everything for themselves. They are very miserly. Because they think it is their hard work. Why should I give to others? It is my hard work. I am working hard, whereas the other people are enjoying and having fun. I am sacrificing everything and focusing on my work, and I am earning all this. Then why should I share with the other? That is their thought process. So they are very miserly in terms of giving things to others. Mainly with the money, very miserly. They don't spend. And I stands for inflexibility. Another important characteristics. Inflexibility. Inflexibility. They are very rigid. Inflexibility with morality. Morality and values. Morality and values. They will be very much sticking on to that. Morality or values. They will look at things as black and white. They will scrupulously follow the rules and regulations. That is the meaning of this inflexibility with regard to morality and values. Scrupulous way of following the rules and regulations. Their dictum is keep the rule and rule will keep you. Keep the rule and rule will keep you. But they do it in a very scrupulous manner. Very rigidly they follow the rule. So their morality also is very much rigid. That is the next characteristics again. Inflexibility again, or with rigidity. Rigidity. They are not the same. Related. Rigidity, reluctance and refusal. Rigidity, reluctance, refusal. All are synonyms. Reluctance and refusal. They don't accept the proposals of the others, ideas of the others, suggestions given by others. They will stick on to their own views and ideas. They think they have the best ideas in the world. And they are very fixed mentality, very inflexible, very rigid, very reluctant, very stubborn, very difficult to convince them. We cannot convince them, only they will make us to convince ourselves. We will be tired of convincing these people. They have their own convictions because they are very inflexible, very rigid, very reluctant, and they refuse anything and everything. That is rigidity, inflexibility and rigidity. Then T, task again, task completion. Task completion. They never complete a task. They will be all the time working but never completing. They will be all the time working without even recreation, without even fun, without relaxation, without leisure, but they will never be able to complete a task because they don't get satisfied. They don't get contentment. They cannot satisfy themselves because they are perfectionistic people, workaholics. So task will never get completed. They keep on working but there is no completion. They reach a stage of completion but they feel they are not done well. So again they are starting from the beginning. So they keep on working. So there is no productivity. Only work is done. Only time is invested, energy is invested. Whole self is given even at the cost of leisure and enjoyment and recreation, but there is no productivity, no task completion. And finally, H stands for hoarding. Another important character is hoarding, H-O-A-R-D. Hoarding. Hoarding means accumulating things, heaping and piling things. They will never discard anything. If you go to the rooms, they will count all the old files. No, everything will be there. Even if it is good for nothing, still they will keep them. They cannot get rid of those things. Hoarding, another important character. If you have seen this characteristic, that means these people may be having this OCD. They cannot get rid of things. We feel it is useless stuff. Why are you keeping it here? You can get rid of them. But they say no, it is needed for them. They will still find a place to, to accommodate that. So they keep on accumulating things, hoarding, heaping, piling up things. They cannot get rid of the old stuff. Even if they are getting transferred from one place to another, they carry everything. Very difficult for them to discard something. Hoarding up things, piling up things, heaping up things. So these are the characteristics of our obsessive compulsive disordered people. Just to sum up, basically they have anxiety and nervousness. They also a lot of fear. And the acronym that describes their personality is low mirth. Mirth means enjoyment. Low enjoyment or no enjoyment. No merriment in their lives. No leisure activities. They are fully organization focused. Workaholics. And they are miserly way of spending. Habits. Very inflexible in terms of morality and values. They are very rigid, reluctant, and they refuse things. And they never complete a task. And they hoard up things, they pile up things, heaping up. Without, they cannot get rid of things, they cannot discard things. So these are some of the characteristics through which we will be able to understand the person who is suffering from obsessive compulsive disorder. So you have seen these three personality disorders which comes under cluster C. That is avoidant personality disorder, dependent personality disorder, and then obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Basically, they are anxious and nervous, they are very fearful, and they will be avoiding. Thank you. So tomorrow we will see the axis 3. We have completed axis 2. Thank you.